probably going to make a lot of you angry today, and I'm sorry in advance, but let's jump in. Hi friends, today I am going to be giving my review and discussion for Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. I finished this monster of a book a week or so ago, and I've taken my time to do this review because I really wanted to think about it and process my feelings, and I'm still not 100% sure how I feel about it, but we will talk about that, and let's jump in. To give a non-spoilery background for what this book is, we can kind of discuss that before we get into more details, but The Way of Kings is the first book of the Stormlight Archive, which is supposed to be a 10-book mega epic written by Brandon Sanderson. It is set on a planet called Roshar, where there are these nasty storms, and the way of life isn't entirely great. We have different POVs in this book, and within the book itself is massive. It's over 1,000 pages, and each subsequent book, I believe, only gets longer and longer. Within each book, we have different parts, and I actually do appreciate this about Sanderson, that part one will have the POVs of specific characters, part two, different, and it goes so on and so on. I found that some of the POVs and voices in this story were incredibly irritating. Our protagonist for this book is a man named Kaladin. He is a former soldier who has been sold into slavery. His life is abysmal. He ends up becoming a bridge carrier and loader, and he works on this one bridge specifically called Bridge 4. Bridge 4 is where all of the miscreants are sent, and life is just waiting to die. On a bridge run, chances are most of you are going to die. Our other main POV, I would argue, for the first chunk of this book is a girl named Shalyn, and she was probably my least favorite Sanderson character I have ever come across. If you've been following along, you know that since December of this year, I've been reading my way through the Cosmere. It's my first time reading my way through the Cosmere, and up until this book, I was so jazzed about everything that I had read. I had read Mistborn Era 1, Mistborn Secret Histories, Elantris, Warbreaker. I loved them. I really enjoyed all of these books. With Way of Kings, I don't know if my expectations were too high going into this, or if I was so accustomed at this point to Sanderson's other style of writing, or perhaps that I have just read too much Sanderson in a brief period of time, that I found this book to be difficult for me to get through. This isn't to say that it's because it's long. Yes, I've read long books. I haven't had a problem with long books before. It's because many parts of this book are boring. I'm sorry that this is probably going to offend a lot of people, because I know that this book is beloved and people are very passionate about the Stormlight Archive. And I might feel differently once I've made my way through books 2, 3, 4, because those are the only books that are out so far. But I had a really hard time with some of these characters, and we're gonna jump into that now. If you are interested in the Stormlight Archive and don't care about spoilers, then you can keep listening. If you do care about spoilers, I suggest you stop watching now. In addition to our POVs for Kaladin and Shalyn, we have POVs from a man named Dalinar and his son. I want to say it's Adolin or Adolin. I'm not sure. I don't do audiobooks, so really I don't know. I'm going to pronounce names in this wrong. I know, and I'm sorry. Of these four people, the main person that I found to be super interesting was Kaladin. Kaladin, we find, is so depleted and is just in a rough state. But before we get into the Kaladin chapters, we need to talk about the two, not one, but two prologues to this book. When I first read the first prologue, when we're seeing the Knights Radiant on the battlefield and what's happening, I'm thinking, okay, this is fine. It's a ton of information, but it's fine. The feeling that I kind of had while reading it was sort of reminiscent to the prologue of Wheel of Time. It had that kind of epicness to it, and I was sitting there thinking, all right, this is going to be a solid foundation for this story. I'm excited. I'm into this. And then we get to the next prologue, and I'm like, what's going on here? I thought we just had a prologue. We are introduced to Szeth, and I like him. It's interesting. I'm really digging what's going on so far. And again, I'm thinking, cool, I like what's going on. We then don't see anything about this for a really long time. And normally that's okay when a book is like 500 pages, but when a book is 1,000 pages and there's so much nothingness between them, I had a really hard time with this. I know that one of the big things that is said throughout this book is journey before destination, and I feel like that was almost Sanderson saying to his audience, like, listen guys, be with me. This is gonna be a journey, but the destination is worth it. At times, I definitely felt that because we meet certain characters in the book like Yasna and Wit, and I'm thinking, great, I'm in. I like these characters, let's dig deeper. But there's certain parts of this book that, man, were just forever. They felt so slow. I will say I loved pretty much all of Kaladin's storyline. I really got involved with Bridge 4. I like all of the characters that are at Bridge 4, maybe excluding Gaz and some of the authority figures that come into that scenario later. But I loved Moash. I love Rock. I really love all of the secondary characters at Bridge 4 because they are complex characters, and it's something that I found very interesting. Shallan. Oh boy, where do we start with Shallan? She is quite a tedious character, I feel like. I found that she only really got interesting near the end of this 1,000-page book. She is a character who is, I guess, meant to be in a precarious position. I've seen on a few online things that Shallan gets better as the story goes on, or more of you read of the Cosmere, things kind of make more sense for Shallan, but I shouldn't have to read supplemental material to understand and relate to the character in the book that I'm reading now, was my personal feeling. I liked Shallan's plot of trying to steal from Yasna, who is this very educated atheist princess. I liked that plot line. I thought it was interesting. However, I don't think Shallan is written nearly as witty as she is supposed to seem. I found her talks with Yasna to often be quite tedious. I think Yasna as a character is excellent, especially I found this part to be very compelling. I like that Sanderson, even though he is a devoutly religious Mormon, can write an atheist perspective very well, and I found that incredibly endearing, and I really latched on to this part of the story. Yasna's character was one of my favorites for sure. I wish she would have had POVs. I was kind of just waiting, like, book and part, and I was like, we'll have to get to a Yasna POV eventually, but we only got her through Shallan, which was kind of a bummer. We see this story evolving, and Shallan has to become Yasna's ward in order to steal a fabrial from her. A fabrial is something that can create, and Shallan's family desperately needs this because they are going broke since her father died and the fabrial that he had used is no longer working. This is fine, but like I felt way too much of the story was devoted to this, and that's part one. That's just part one. I feel like there's so much more story. Later in the story, when we meet Dalinar and Adolin, initially I wasn't super crazy about either of their chapters. By the end, I was really intrigued by Dalinar's chapters. I loved his vision chapters, where he is someone that has, every time there is a storm that has come through, which is fairly often, he has started convulsing, and it looks like almost he's having seizures, but while he is in this convulsive state, he is in fact having these memories or premonitions. He's not entirely sure what they are at this point, but these were so well written. I really liked these. I liked that we were getting to learn the history through him and some of the stories. I really liked this by the end of the book. I thought this was very endearing, and I liked his relationships that he had with people. His relationship with the king is very frustrating. His relationship with Sadeas, I'm not really sure how you say that man's name, was very complicated, very frustrating. His honor, his relationship with his second son, his relationship with his niece Yasna, with his sister-in-law who's his love interest. He became a very compelling and interesting character as the story went on. But his son, Adolin, was not for me. He was just frustrating from beginning to end, and it was only at the end when he was proven that no, his father wasn't insane. He is in fact quite sane, and he's been treating him like dirt for most of this story, that it was like, okay, now maybe you'll be more tolerable. I know that I sound like I'm whinging a lot, and I'm sorry, because I really wanted to love this book. I was so looking forward to this series because of the fact that I have read all this Sanderson and I've been so invested, and I just felt really let down. And I know this isn't a common opinion, it seems, on BookTube. A lot of people are really gung-ho on the Stormlight Archive. And again, my opinion might change as I go forward reading the story. Because I feel this way, I find that I'm a little more reluctant to jump into more books that are over 1,000 pages and increasingly getting longer. But I'm going to talk for a few minutes about some of the things that I really liked about this book. Hoyd. I loved Hoyd in this book so much. I had a feeling that something was going on with the Wit character. I was like, there's something deeper to this character than we understand, and I wasn't surprised when I found out that it was Hoyd. I loved the way that it came about. His specific scene with Kaladin in one of the ravines where he's telling him the story of with shadow and smoke about this kingdom that was killing people, and it was just such a beautiful scene, and I loved it. And for me, it was probably the best scene of the whole book. I really loved this part. I loved the relationship trauma that Kaladin was rehashing for himself with his brother who has died. This seemed very real. I could buy into this. It's definitely a weird form of PTSD that he's dealing with and anxiety, and I liked this part. I was pulled into that story. I kept wondering why it was that Kaladin didn't go off to become a surgeon, even though he had been training for that his whole life and ended up becoming a soldier. I felt very pulled into that. I liked Syl. I wanted to know more about why it was that she was becoming more and more sentient as the story was going on. What was it about her? What made her a special spren? I wanted to know more about the Knights Radiant. So there definitely are things in the story that I loved and found very interesting. I just felt that maybe it took too long to get there. And for me, maybe I went in with too high of an expectation. I'm just not sure. I really don't know. I don't know. I feel somewhat let down from this story, but I'm definitely going to continue on with the Stormlight Archive. I just don't know exactly when that's going to be. I know that there's probably a lot of controversial opinions being thrown at you right now for the Stormlight Archive, at least for The Way of Kings. I found that by the end of this book, I was very tired of some of the points of views from the character, but I was also intrigued with some of the projections of where certain characters were going forward in the next story. I liked that. I am hopeful that I will want to get back to that world sooner rather than later, but I'm not entirely certain again when that's going to be. What are your feelings of Way of Kings and the Stormlight Archive? You can let me know in the comments below. I'm sorry if I've personally offended you and you're someone that loves the Stormlight Archive or Way of Kings specifically. Let me know if you feel like there was something I really missed, or really what it is about this book that you absolutely love and pulls you in, or the opposite, what has turned you off of this series and this book. I really do want to know. I'm curious. I still love Brandon Sanderson. I'm definitely going to continue with his works. It's just, this was kind of a letdown for me. If you'd like to help support me, you can hit like and subscribe. Please let me know your comments and feelings below. Please be kind. If you'd like to follow me on Instagram, you can find me at Fantasy Awash. And as always, I will see you next time.